Sometimes history just crams more into a few months than you see in entire decades. The spring of 1945 was one of those times. It was an absolutely insane period, and right at the center of it all was a man who became president pretty much by pure accident. So, let's get into it. The unbelievable story of Harry S. Truman's first 4 months in office.
On April 12, 1945, this was the question on everyone's lips. I mean, literally, everyone. From world leaders in London and Moscow to regular folks on the streets of America, almost nobody knew the man who had just inherited the most powerful job on the planet.
To really get the level of shock here, you have to put yourself back in that moment. The world is deep in the final, brutal chaos of World War II. And for 12 long years, America, and really most of the free world, had followed one leader, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And then, just like that, he was gone.
Now get this, Harry Truman had been vice president for just 82 days. That's it. And the truth is, he'd been kept completely in the dark. Roosevelt was a famously private leader, and he basically thought the vice presidency was just for show. He almost never met with Truman. He shared zero secrets. Not about war strategy, not about tensions with our allies, and he definitely didn't mention a top-secret weapon being built out in the desert. Truman even called himself a political eunuch. And now he was in charge of everything.
The reaction around the world was just seismic. Winston Churchill said he felt a physical blow. Over in his Berlin bunker, a delusional Hitler thought it was a miracle that would save him. And a really nervous Joseph Stalin just kept asking his aides, what is he like? Roosevelt's whole secretive style meant that even America's top general, Dwight Eisenhower, had to admit he had almost complete ignorance about the new commander-in-chief.
And Eisenhower wasn't the only one. This number right here is just startling. A poll in 1944 found that only 55% of Americans could even name their own vice president. Just think about that. The man who now held the fate of the nation in his hands was a complete stranger to almost half the country.
So that brings us back to the main question. Who was this guy from Missouri? Well, to figure that out, we've got to rewind and look at a life that seemed destined for pretty much anything but the White House.
This really gets to the heart of the contradictions of Harry Truman. On one side, you've got a string of failures. A failed clothing store owner, a failed business speculator, a guy with terrible eyesight, flat eyeballs he called him, who couldn't even play sports as a kid. But then, on the other side, there was this quiet, deep strength. He was a huge reader of history, a decorated army captain who rallied his terrified troops in World War I, and a man who just deeply believed in good old-fashioned self-discipline.
Yeah, his journey was anything but glamorous. It was really forged through a lifetime of just grinding it out. Born in rural Missouri, he ended up being a farmer for more than a decade. He joined the Army late at age 33, but his natural ability to lead made him a super respected captain. After the war, his men's clothing store went bust, so he kind of stumbled into politics, backed by a corrupt political machine. It even got the nickname the bellhop of Pendergasts. Not exactly a ringing endorsement.
This quote from Truman when he was just a young farmer, it says it all, doesn't it? He had this little spark of ambition inside him, but it was always fighting against this really powerful self-doubt that was shaped by years and years of things just not working out.
Okay, so let's jump back to April 1945, because this quiet, complicated man was about to face a trial by fire. I mean, one that no president before or since has ever had to endure. The second he took that oath of office, the world just fell on him. The crises came one after another, like a flood. He had to immediately figure out what to do about an aggressive Soviet Union. He was just learning about the soul-crushing scale of the Holocaust. He had to manage this gigantic war economy. And oh yeah, on top of all that, he was about to be briefed on the single most terrifying secret in human history. And remember, he was hearing all of this for the very first time. In his very first meeting with the Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov, this mild-mannered guy from Missouri showed some serious backbone. He chewed Molotov out over the Soviets breaking their promises in Poland. It was a huge departure from FDR's friendlier style. Right then and there, the world got the message. This guy is not Roosevelt. At the exact same time, these horrifying cables started coming in from General Eisenhower. They described scenes that were, in his words, things that beggar description. The first official, sickening confirmation of the Nazi death camps. Truman was staring right into the abyss of what humans are capable of, and suddenly, it was his job to end it.
And then came the secret to end all secrets. The Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, pulled Truman aside to finally tell him about the Manhattan Project. As vice president, he knew nothing about it. Now, as president, he was learning that America was about to create a new explosive of almost unbelievable destructive power. Can you even imagine?
The weight of all this was just immense, and Truman felt totally and completely alone. Even his wife, Bess, the person who knew him better than anyone, shared the nation's fear. In his darkest moments, he knew that his closest confidant wasn't even sure he was up to the task.
And it was from this place of deep loneliness and self-doubt that all these massive crises would funnel down into one single terrifying decision. A decision that would define his presidency and, really, the rest of the 20th century.
So, the war in Europe was wrapping up, but the Pacific was an absolute slaughterhouse. The battle for the island of Okinawa was just horrific. Japanese forces were using waves of kamikaze pilots on suicide missions, and military planners were telling Truman that a land invasion of Japan could cost as many as 1 million American lives.
What happened next happened fast. Incredibly fast. On July 16th, the atomic bomb was successfully tested in the New Mexico desert. It wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real. Just about a week later, at a conference in Potsdam, Truman gave the military the green light. The Allies issued one final warning: surrender unconditionally or face total destruction. Japan didn't respond, so on August 6th, the order was carried out.
You know, in a private moment with an advisor, Truman just laid it bare. You can feel the crushing weight of the choice in his words. He wasn't being cavalier about this. He was utterly terrified. He understood he was standing on a cliff that no leader in history had ever even seen before.
And right here, in his own private diary, you can see him wrestling with it. You can see him trying to put some kind of moral framework around this unimaginable act. He wanted it used on military targets, not civilians. It was this desperate attempt to find a moral compass for something that was completely off the charts.
So the bomb fell. The war ended. And the man who became president by a complete accident was left to deal with the brand new world he had just helped create.
In the years that followed, he guided America through the very beginnings of the Cold War. And then came 1948, when the ultimate underdog did something nobody thought was possible. Against all the polls and all the predictions, he won the presidency all on his own, finally shaking off that accidental president label for good.
When you step back, it's just an unbelievable transformation in only 4 months. In April, he was the little guy from Kansas City, just an obscure footnote in politics. By August, he was the leader of the victorious Allied powers, the man who ended the biggest war in human history, and, for better or for worse, became the architect of our new atomic age.
And that really leaves us with the ultimate question about Harry S. Truman, doesn't it? Was he just an ordinary guy who got thrown into a completely impossible situation, or did that whole lifetime of struggle, that sense of duty, that quiet grit, did all of that somehow make him, by accident, the perfect person for that extraordinary and absolutely terrifying moment in time?